Hello, Jack here. As somebody who in some circles is still sort of the token trans guy, a lot of people ask me how to get on HRT. The problem is, I started HRT 10 years ago, and a lot of things have changed since then. The diagnosis you get is different, there are fewer restrictions, it is just quite frankly easier to get on HRT now than it was when I started it. But it's not easy at all if you don't know where to start, so I put together this video explaining 3 basic routes to getting on hormone replacement therapy in the state of Wisconsin. Most of these also work perfectly fine in other states, but some of the resources I've included are not found throughout the United States, so it's really meant for people in Wisconsin. This, for a while, was going to be a much more exhaustive list than it eventually developed into. I ran down a bunch of healthcare systems and whether or not people have gotten HRT through them, whether with or without a referral and other stuff like that. I do still include a little bit of information specific to Wisconsin-based healthcare systems I'm familiar with, but the problem with making a firm list like, oh, Aurora will do this, Froedtert will do that, UW Health will do this, sometimes this can be inconsistent. Mileage can vary a lot from doctor to doctor, even within the same healthcare system and clinic to clinic, and sometimes that information just isn't readily available. It also meant that this video was much longer than it needed to be. You're here to learn how to get on HRT, not whether or not every single healthcare system in the state of Wisconsin provides it. I might make a non-video resource with that information in the future, but for now, let's just talk about the 3 primary ways to get on HRT in the state of Wisconsin. 1, get a referral straight from your primary care physician. 2, get a referral from a therapist. Or 3, get HRT or a prescription for HRT directly through an informed consent program. All of these are, of course, perfectly valid ways to get on hormone replacement therapy, and which one you choose is going to depend on things like your situation, how long you've been out as trans, how comfortable you are with your primary care physician, if you have a primary care physician, how good you are at navigating the healthcare system in general, what diagnoses you're comfortable getting, whether or not you have health insurance, and a whole host of other factors. So even though I have some opinions about what you should try first and what you should reserve for a last resort, those are merely my opinions, and I would not put anything on this list if I thought there was anything wrong with you choosing them if your situation calls for it. Now, I know a lot of people watching this aren't going to want to do this and are considering skipping straight to the informed consent section, but I'd encourage you to hear me out here because primary care physician and informed consent are actually not 2 different things. The trans community has long held kind of a perception that there's this traditional normie healthcare system that hates trans people and makes you jump through endless hoops to get on HRT, and then there's this empowering informed consent provider stuff outside the normie healthcare system that you can go to in order to bypass all of that. But this is kind of an out-of-date perception. Nowadays, a lot of healthcare systems actually use the informed consent model or are willing to refer you to a healthcare system that does. And in fact, every healthcare system that I looked into when I was researching this subject either had people prescribing HRT with very few barriers or were willing to refer people to other resources that did. Because of this, my formal suggestion is that if you have a primary care physician who you know and trust, who knows that you're trans and has demonstrated relative competence in trans healthcare, ask them what the next steps are to get on HRT. And while that will vary from healthcare system to healthcare system, you may very well find that this is all you need to do. For instance, I know that there's documentation out there suggesting that Aurora Healthcare, which is a very big healthcare system in Wisconsin, uses an informed consent model, and that a primary care doctor can either prescribe HRT themselves or refer you to an endocrinologist that provides it without needing a psychological assessment. Another one, UW Health, they also use an informed consent model, and a lot of people get referred to UW Health for hormones by doctors in other healthcare systems. UW Health actually advertises these services on their website and indicates that they are accepting new patients. Even if your healthcare system does require a psychological assessment, that may very well not mean months of therapy. It may just mean 1 or 2 sessions just to get a letter written to make sure you know what you're getting into. In my opinion, going through your general healthcare system for HRT has a lot of benefits, especially if you're like me and have chronic healthcare conditions that need to be managed that are affected by HRT. My primary care doctor and my endocrinologist share things like lab results and blood pressure readings, and since I have hypertension, which is made worse by testosterone, it's just more convenient and better for my overall health that all of that care comes from the same place, from 2 doctors who are well connected with each other. It makes it more cost effective too because labs are expensive, and since my insurance isn't very good, it's really useful to be able to not only have an in-network doctor providing HRT, but one that shares lab results with my other doctor. Obviously that's going to depend on whether or not you have insurance and what kind, but in my case this has been useful to me. I think a lot of people don't do this because they're afraid that they're going to learn their primary care doctor is transphobic, and honestly, in my opinion, if your doctor is transphobic, that's information that you need to know so that you can work on getting a different doctor. Once you're on HRT, that's going to come out anyway, and it's going to be a factor in what kind of health you get if your doctor doesn't approve of that. Obviously, this is all going to be your prerogative, and I have met people who had very specific circumstances that meant they could not take this advice. I'm just saying that under more common circumstances, if you have health insurance, if you have a good relationship with a primary care physician, my recommendation is to try talking to that doctor first. Next, we'll talk about how I got on HRT the first time. When I first went on HRT, what I did was I went to a gender therapist. That therapist provided me with a list of local endocrinologists who did transgender-specific HRT. I called down that list according to who was closest to me, where I was living at the time, until I found one who was accepting new patients, and through that process, I found an endocrinologist in the Milwaukee area who became my primary care physician until I moved to the Fox Valley a few years later. I would have kept her as a primary care physician, but as often happens when you get old, I started acquiring chronic health conditions that needed more frequent care than just yearly checkups like I'd been getting before, and so I started going to a doctor up here for just taking care of that, and traveled down to Milwaukee for HRT once a year until I went off of it for my hormone hiatus. This method can feel dated, but it still works perfectly fine, and it's a great option for a lot of trans people. If you feel like you need more guidance in the process of transitioning, if you need somebody to help you with things like coming out and getting documents changed, if you're struggling with mental illness, or if you're pretty sure you need HRT but aren't entirely sure yet, going to a therapist to sort that sort of thing out is not only valid, it's actually a pretty good idea. This is also a really good idea if you happen to already be going to a trans-friendly therapist for other things like anxiety or depression, which is how some of my friends got on HRT. They didn't specifically go to a therapist to get HRT, but they wound up getting HRT because they happened to already be going to a therapist who was competent in that sort of thing. I actually even have one friend who went to a therapist trying to convince themselves not to go on HRT and wound up getting on HRT through that as well. Now, if you watch my throwback episodes, you know that I fucking hated my therapist. Because of this, it's important to mention a couple of things. First, things have changed a lot in 10 years. The expectation that you go through years of real-life experience and months of therapy with somebody who is just aggressively pulling apart your gender expression to judge whether or not you're sufficiently manly or womanly enough for HRT it isn't really there anymore as far as mainstream psychology is concerned. And second, the therapist that I went to was particularly bad even for the time. Most therapists weren't gaslighting their patients or trying to convince them that they had repressed memories. So even then, going to a therapist wasn't necessarily that bad. It was a burden that we shouldn't have been obligated to go through, but like I had some pretty out there experiences even for 2011. Speaking of bad therapists, just as a warning, when I was looking for a therapist to write a top surgery referral, I had the bright idea to try searching on my insurance provider's website for one, and I went to their website and I looked up LGBT issues in their mental health provider section, and I was just bombarded with conversion therapists. Because of this, I wanted to mention quickly how to find an actual friendly gender therapist. When I was trying to get a top surgery referral, I actually found mine using Facebook. I have a lot of local trans friends, and I just asked them for recommendations. Somebody mentioned a therapist near me who had written his top surgery referral letter in only a couple of sessions. I went back to my insurance provider's website just to make sure she was covered under them. I went to her, she wrote me a letter after a session, and it worked out great. If you don't have a lot of local trans friends, there are two resources that I would recommend checking. The first is Forge Wisconsin, which is actually where I found my HRT therapist back in 2011, so they've been around for a while. The second is Psychology Today. A lot of the providers on these lists are explicitly trans-friendly. They advertise that they write referrals for HRT, and some of them are even trans themselves. The links to those two resources are in the description and in the end credits if you need them. Finally, our last section, which is technically kind of three sections, but they all have something in common. Now, not everybody wants or can go the two routes that I described already for a variety of reasons. They're not always friendly to non-binary or gender non-conforming trans people, not everybody has health insurance, or maybe your health insurance has trans exclusions. Maybe you don't want to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, or maybe there just are no local providers for you. The following three resources are all available to people living throughout the state of Wisconsin. They're all informed consent based, and they're all non-binary friendly. One of them I strongly consider a last resort, but I'll get to that when I talk about it. Anyway, here we go. Although my number one recommendation is to talk with a doctor you have a prior existing relationship with first, I consider Planned Parenthood's HRT services to be a close second, and I've been aggressively making people aware that they started prescribing transgender HRT in the state of Wisconsin. You can set up an appointment with them online through their scheduler, and you can pick either an in-person appointment or a telehealth appointment. When I went through their schedule just to see how many openings they had available, I was able to find an appointment like 3 weeks from today. I didn't set one up because I don't need one, but if you do, it shouldn't take too long to get an appointment with them. Planned Parenthood's prices are based on a sliding scale, so you'll need to set up an appointment to get a good idea of how much it'll cost for you. They also do take health insurance, and they tend to be very affordable. Generally, Planned Parenthood is going to give you a prescription to whatever local pharmacy is available to you, and if you don't have health insurance, you can use something like GoodRx to get your actual medication cheaper than the list price. So they are very affordable, they're convenient, they're throughout the state, they use informed consent. So if you can't, for whatever reason, get HRT just through your regular doctor, I recommend Planned Parenthood as your second choice. The Howard Brown Clinic is in Chicago. It's quite a drive from the Fox Valley, but for a long time this was basically the option for Wisconsinites who wanted to get hormones using an informed consent model. And there are still Wisconsinites traveling to Howard Brown today. I also know a few people who went to Howard Brown for many years and then switched to Planned Parenthood as soon as they started prescribing here. One advantage of Howard Brown over the other two options in this informed consent segment is that Howard Brown will work with minors provided they have the informed consent of all parents involved. I don't personally make videos for minors, but if you're like me, you probably know a transgender minor or the parent of a transgender minor who may or may not have asked for this kind of information. So there you go. Howard Brown will work with minors. I also actually tried Howard Brown before I went to a therapist. I don't remember the details of why it didn't work out for me. It was some combination of where I lived and my insurance situation. I do not have a grudge against them, though. I highly recommend them if you're able to access them. At worst, if this is something you're interested in, you can always just call them and see if you qualify. And then if that doesn't work out, use one of the other options on the list. So before I talk about Folks Health, I want to make a quick point. I don't like Folks. I have a huge vendetta against them. There are good reasons to use them, but I would strongly prefer that you try Planned Parenthood first. It's highly likely Planned Parenthood will be more cost effective for you. Someday I'll make a video detailing why I have a vendetta against Folks. The gist of it is that their advertising implies that they're this radical empowering service, when in reality they're a for-profit venture that exists to take advantage of trans people's healthcare anxieties. But if you can afford it, and all other options fall through, you should be aware that they exist, and there is nothing wrong with using them if that is the option that you have. Folks is an HRT subscription service. For a monthly fee, they give you consultations, they get your blood work done through, I believe, affiliations with a private lab, and then they send you HRT through a mail order pharmacy. If you get basic HRT, it costs $139 a month to start testosterone through Folks, and $89 to continue it if you've been on it for at least a year. Estrogen costs $119 a month to start it, or $59 to continue it. There are also some upcharges. For instance, if you want finasteride to go with your estrogen, it'll cost an extra $9 a month, and if you want testosterone gel, you'll be paying an extra $59 a month. I found a lot of trans feminine folks to rack up pretty big monthly bills with this service through this kind of upcharge, because trans feminine people tend to go on more than one medication, whereas trans masculine people tend to just go on testosterone. You'll find all of that information on the website, though. Just know that there are upcharges. It's not necessarily going to be this cost if you need more than just hormones. One thing I will also mention is that Folks has kind of a confusing billing structure that has resulted in surprise bills for some people who use it. They bill you once a month, but then they give you 3 months of medication at a time, and what this means is that once you get that medication, you will not be able to cancel Folks for at least 2 more months. You're going to be on the hook for at least 3 payments per shipment of medication, and they will not let you cancel until those payments are all made. I've seen people who unfortunately thought they would be able to cancel Folks if they got in like severe financial straits, who found that they weren't able to cancel it when they did have a financial emergency. And I've actually seen one person who throughout this process, I guess, thought she was only supposed to be billed $200 every 3 months when it was actually every month. And so she found out when she got what she assumed was a surprise charge of $200, that her hormones were going to be a whopping 3 times more than she thought they were going to be. So if you do use Folks, just make sure that you read the fine print so that you don't wind up surprised by any charges that you get. Anyway, that's it. 3 basic ways to get on HRT in the state of Wisconsin, or 5 ways depending on how you sort it all out. Hopefully one of them works for you. All the sources that I used and websites that you'll need to get on HRT using these resources are in the description, as well as in the rolling end credits if you need them. Until next time, happy trails.